For those of you not in the know, The Predator is a franchise that started in the 1980s with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And at first, yeah, it was a typical Schwarzenegger movie, with him as the big buff star that fights an alien monster that came to Earth. But the monster itself was so fascinating that this franchise quickly became more than Schwarzenegger. Unlike the Terminator franchise, which never grew out of his shadow. Which is why they got his wrinkly old tushy out of retirement to play that robot in 2 terrible sequels. Don't get me wrong, they tried doing that for a few Predator movies as well, to rile up casual movie fans, but it was never really necessary for the studio to bend over backward to get Schwarzenegger back, because The Predator quickly became the star of its own franchise, and has its own massive fandom, simply because it is so fascinating. A technologically superior alien species that appears to behave like a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer. It travels from planet to planet, hunting the most dangerous species, performing strange rituals over the corpses of the prey that it defeats, and taking the skull as a trophy. We finally arrived at this moment in time, where the movie Predator Badlands is soon coming out in theaters, and the Predator will be the protagonist of his own movie. This has already happened for decades in video games and comics, but it's nice to see it on the silver screen. Hopefully it'll be very good, but we'll have to wait and see. It's directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who directed Prey from 2022, and Predator Killer of Killers that came out a few months ago. Although I'm grateful to Prey for reviving the franchise, it was the most boring Predator movie ever, with heavy-handed girl boss slay queen messaging. But Killer of Killers was awesome, and has become my favorite Predator movie, and an instant classic of the franchise in my opinion. So the upcoming new movie could go in either direction, but both films do a better job than all the other ones in exploring the Predator as a techno-primitive alien. The Predator as an alien monster is the perfect depiction of the caveman with nukes archetype. Other examples would be the Krogan aliens in the Mass Effect games, or the Brutes in the Halo franchise. These types of aliens are so interesting because of the implications for what they mean for us as humans. Because normally when we think of encountering real-world spacefaring aliens with culture and technology, we often assume they'll be way more enlightened than us, as if we'll look up at the stars and see what we imagine is a better version of ourselves staring back down at us, like the Kryptonians or the logical Vulcans in Star Trek. But the Predator franchise asks the question, what if the aliens are more socially primitive, quote-unquote, than we are? What if they're just cavemen with nukes? Oh, the horror! In the end, this idea is a reflection of our own modern chauvinism and prejudices against other cultural models, where we assume that great technological achievements are necessarily connected with quote-unquote enlightened societies, with similar values or historical trajectories to the current Western value system, as if history is necessarily progressive and forces most technological species into a similar direction, until most aliens will be cosmopolitan urbanites in space, drinking their double-decker soy vegan latte in the cosmic citadel, like in the Mass Effect games. In fact, that's where I heard the caveman with nukes expression as a teenager playing Mass Effect 2. Because when it comes to how tribal and aggressive cultures are able to gain technology, writers usually go for the Krogan route in Mass Effect, where the tech was given to them by the little enlightened cosmopolitan modernist aliens with big brains. In this case, the Salarians. It's usually easier to explain from our current modern perspective than any deeper analysis on the relationship between technology and society. The Salarian doctor Mordin Solus actually says that giving the Krogan technology was like giving nuclear weapons to cavemen, which was a big mistake in his perspective, because if they were left to develop their own technology, then they supposedly would have naturally evolved past their primal instincts and be capable of properly using technology as soft-spoken intellectual types. But this worldview has a lot of assumptions embedded in it. A more intriguing alternative is the Brutes in the Halo video games. Those big gorilla dudes. But it's still dripping with modern chauvinism. At least in Halo, the Brutes developed their own technology, but their primitive pack culture caveman instincts made them nuke themselves, and they never learned from that experience. This is deeper commentary on the human condition, to the point of making the Brutes a caricature of ourselves. What if we are the big dumb gorillas that never learn from history? Whoa! You're blowing my mind, bro! Also, even for me, it's difficult to imagine one of these big hairy apes that go all in the game as a nuclear scientist. but for some reason the Predators managed to pull it off. They are also known as the Yautja in the expanded comics, which officially became canon in the latest movie. These aliens actually seem like a plausible technologically advanced caveman, quote-unquote, society. This is a case of a franchise and extended lore taking the idea seriously and moving beyond modern prejudices, where the writers consider that maybe modern Enlightenment values aren't a historical inevitability, and that we will not find kindred spirits in the stars that we can drink space Starbucks with, where the galaxy is full of diverse alien civilizations, but deep down they're virtually all Western-minded consumers. I'm Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite store in the Citadel. As much as I love the Mass Effect games, it had some really goofy aspects to the world building, but that's for another video. The proper term for the Yautja Predator Society would be techno-primitivism. It's when technology actually allows a society to live in more supposedly primitive ways, but still be a competitive culture with the necessary weaponry and mastery of science to defend their way of life from the other more sophisticated industrial cultures, so as to not end up in a major disadvantage in the clash of civilizations, like what happened with the Native Americans or the Aborigines in Australia. It's why in Predator lore, the Yautja have a connection with Native American tribes like the Comanche, recently explored in the movie Prey in 2022, but it's been a thing in the comics for a while, which makes sense. There's definitely a cultural similarity there. Many Native American tribes were nomadic or semi-sedentary hunting cultures, with rituals surrounding the way of the hunt. Though many of these Native American cultures, like the Comanche, produced great warriors and resourceful societies, able to adopt new technologies that they bought from the Europeans, like the horse and the rifle, it's hard to conceive of nomadic or semi-sedentary societies that rely on hunting being capable of actually developing very sophisticated technology on their own. It just feels like you'd have to be an agrarian civilization with many different classes of people that can become builders, workers, and especially scholars that dedicate themselves to learning, like the Maya or the Aztecs. It's easier to imagine space Aztecs than it is to imagine space Comanches, which I suppose is why the Predators definitely also have a cultural connection to the Aztec and the Maya, as it is explained in the first Alien vs. Predator movie. But the Yautja also have a clear connection with the Japanese samurai in the books and movies. You just get the sense that the Predators found kindred spirits in certain human cultures with similar fighting traditions and constantly visited them for a good scrap. And the Yautja found themselves becoming a part of the mythology of these kindred cultures. But the Yautja Predators are not exactly space samurai, which is a lot easier for the modern mind to imagine, like the Klingons in Star Trek or the Sangheili elite aliens in Halo, because these are space warrior cultures, not space hunters. Warrior-ruled societies are still normal civilizations with scientists. They're simply ruled by the warrior class, who are the leading elite, who incorporate dueling with ceremonial melee weapons, similar to the German Empire in World War I under Kaiser Wilhelm II, which was one of the most scientifically and technologically advanced empires on Earth at the time, because they still have entire classes of people that focus on working and developing technology. This kind of stratified society with several classes does not appear to be what the Predators are doing. I mean, the Yautja don't seem to have butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. You know what I'm saying? After decades of lore and around 15 years of following this franchise, you rarely find references to a Predator class of scientists, except maybe in that ridiculous The Predator movie from 2018, which was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in theaters. Prey from 2022 was definitely the most boring Predator movie, but the 2018 movie was clearly the worst movie. I kid you not, my jaw dropped when the Predator wanted to kidnap a child with Asperger's in order to splice the child's DNA into himself. The Predator literally wanted some weaponized autism. You can't make this stuff up. I really wish I could be a fly on the wall in that writer's room. How did no one raise their hand and say, "Excuse me, Shane Black, sir? This all sounds really retarded." If the Predators were in fact revealed to be part of a normal technological alien society, where the hunters are just a small substrate of them, that would ruin the Predators. Especially if they were just the equivalent of rich big game hunter douchebags like a Predator dentist or a Predator lawyer who occasionally went on safari on other planets for a vacation. This would obliterate any interest in the Yautja as a concept. And even if they did it in a cooler way, like having the Yautjas be the warrior ruling class of an established empire, where you still have a bunch of Predator scientists back in their home world quietly producing warp drives and stuff. But that way, they just be uglier versions of the Klingons. Yes, the Yautja have a sense of honor and tradition, which is typical of warrior class ruled societies, but it's actually a hunter's code of honor, not a warrior's code of honor. Predators still stalk and strike from the shadows all the time, like hunters do, which has often been seen as dishonorable in warrior cultures that are more about dueling. And yet, Yautja honor is extremely alien and varied from clan to clan, which is why it's so inconsistent in movies and stories in general, which is why they do things that are more honorable for them, in their perspective, but doesn't really fit our human standards of honor at all, like kidnapping a human who defeated a Yautja for the opportunity to fight other victorious humans in an arena to see if he's worthy to fight the Predator chieftain. For us, that sounds horrible, but for them, it might be a great honor that they're offering you. In their perspective, they might be doing you a favor. Also, the Yautja Predators do have a class system in many of the books, like the elite Predators, the blooded hunters, the unblooded hunters, the bad bloods, etc. But this class system is entirely related to the hunt. They're not like the Klingons that have a merchant caste or a worker caste, and especially a scholar caste to build all those spaceships. For the Predator to remain iconic, he can't lose this caveman with nukes aspect. They have to remain a weird and unusual case of spacefaring tribal hunter society, because that way, they're more than just a movie monster, they become an interesting thought experiment. Because then the question remains, if they just hunt all the time, who's building all that stuff? All those pyramids, plasma guns, and especially all those spaceships. The origins of Predator culture and the lore are still shrouded in mystery, and there still isn't one single canon explanation as to how this semi-nomadic, tribal and ritualistic hunter culture became so technologically advanced. There were various reasonable explanations in some of the books that used to be canon, but then got retconned in other installments. And this was one of the frustrating things with this franchise that made me kind of abandon the fandom after I got into college, as I became interested in other things. Because the Predator lore is still just a mess, with every book, comic, and even movie, each one contradicting the other. One novel would establish one thing about their culture and biology, only for another to completely disregard the whole thing and say the opposite. In the book Alien vs. Predator Prey by S.D. Perry, they're a sexually dimorphic species with males and females being very different in gender role and appearance. While in Predator Forever Midnight by John Shirley, they're a gender-fluid hermaphroditic species with both reproductive organs. They're not even called Yautja in that book. And in the Alien vs. Predator Rage War Book 1 by Tim Lebon, which is the absolute best Predator book I've ever read, they're not gender fluid, but they're more gender egalitarian than the S.D. Perry books. In Rage War Book 1, they're lowly hunters like great white sharks. Males and females are barely different in behavior, though females are a bit bigger than males. In this iteration, they're the most mysterious, with barely even a civilization, making their advanced technology even more of an enigma. But overall, there have been around 6 major explanations offered within the lore. Some are actual explanations in the books that got retconned, mixed with some of my own speculation to spice things up, since most of this lore is just hinted at. Let's get started. Scenario 1. DNA enhancement gone wrong. This is from the silly 2018 The Predator movie directed by Shane Black, where it hints that they were a normal technological society with institutions of science and scholars, but they developed biotechnology and started putting DNA from other species into their own DNA, probably for space exploration purposes to adapt to other planets that they were colonizing, but then things took a wrong turn. They start developing the primitive animal instincts from other creatures that they're splicing into themselves, and suddenly their culture starts reverting into the hunter ways from the predatory beasts whose DNA is now inside them. And over time they become a weird mix of their old technological society combined with their new, more primitive animalistic ways. As a result, they kind of stagnate technologically, except for biotechnology, which becomes a tradition of theirs. The predator hunting instinct combines with the bioscientific imperative, and they become predators in space who hunt others for DNA. This scenario is a little interesting because it explores how scientific progress doesn't have to go on forever, and that progressing too quickly and applying science carelessly can lead to a technological dead end where your species reverts biologically and becomes stuck in a technologically dead-end primitive state. On the other hand, it's just another scenario that assumes that only societies with progressive institutions of science can become spacefaring societies. And the 2018 movie was just so bad, and it completely retconned literally decades of a core aspect of Predator lore. Sure, every book and comic contradicted the other, but the Predators still always remained themselves, always remaining ritualistic hunters stalking others for instinct and tradition. This movie, however, gave them a scientific purpose for no reason. I just really hope it isn't canon, and I hope that the new director, Dan Trachtenberg, just ignores this movie and never references it again, ever. Scenario 2. Rick and Morty sexual dimorphism. Women are the big-brained. This was hinted at by S.D. Perry in his Alien vs. Predator book that I read in high school. It had some cringe female supremacy aspects, but that aside, it did offer an interesting and perfectly plausible explanation to how a tribal hunter-gatherer society could evolve into a technological spacefaring civilization, where the male and females evolutionarily developed very differently from each other. To the point of looking and behaving so differently, they basically formed two opposite societies that only got together during mating season. This scenario takes the theory that in hunter-gatherer societies men go hunting and women gather and look after the tribe to its extreme logical conclusion. The females would stay in the camps, looking after the children, gathering plants for medicinal purposes, and make the stone hunting tools for the males who would go out hunting for long periods of time, and return with the hunted food that the females would ration and administer to the children and to the other members of the tribe. The males would also fight territorial conflicts with other Yautja clans in fierce competition, and the tribes where the females made the most effective tools and organized the best social structures outcompeted the Yautja clans that stayed behind. So, over time, the tribal tents became pyramids, the medicinal herbs became the sci-fi healing kits that you see in the movies, and the hunting weapons became plasma casters. The females basically evolved into a typical agrarian and sedentary civilization, developing many traditions of learning to empower their males, who remained governed by these nomadic and predatory instincts, and evolved into extremely deadly hunters. But the hunting wasn't necessary for food anymore, but still deeply ingrained in their DNA and instincts. So the hunting became necessary for mating rituals. The females would only mate and be attracted to the most effective hunters. So, over time, the men would form these all-male nomadic hunting parties and travel across the galaxy for big game. By getting enough hunting trophies, they earn mating rights to procreate with the females back in settled planets, while the females are governed by more cooperative and sedentary instincts, learning science and technology from wise matriarchs. The females then give technology and spaceships to the males to fulfill their part for the benefit of the species, which would be space exploration during the hunts, and by doing so, they find new planets to settle, which the women would then move into and form their colonies. It's a symbiotic relationship, but the males and females barely interact, forming two very different parallel societies that help each other. One with territorial expansion, and the other with tech. When the children are born, after a period of maturing, the males are taken by the father's clan, and the females are taken by the matriarchs. This scenario is interesting and plausible. In biology, male and females sometimes do evolve into almost entirely different types of animals that look and behave completely differently. However, this scenario is also kind of goofy, like that Rick and Morty Gazorpazorb episode where the women are enlightened scientists that rule everything, and the males are just savage barbarian brutes in constantly warring clans. This might actually be the direction that Dan Trachtenberg is going, based on his Prey movie from 2022, where the main character is a Comanche teenage girl forced to stay in the village and study medicine with her mother, and the men won't let her be a big bad hunter. The new movie Predator Badlands appears to be about a male predator and a android of female design who backs him up with a different skill set, more related to technological knowledge. So this gender dynamic might be explored. Trachtenberg clearly has a thing for gender dynamic storylines, and he's clearly a fan of the books, and is probably aware of this old bit of lore. So this might be where he's going. And if so, it probably will be the cringe feminist utopian fantasy disaster that we all think it will be. Something that will make me cringe so hard that my teenage past self from 15 years ago will feel it. But maybe not. I didn't like the movie Prey. It was my second least favorite Predator movie. But like I said, Killer of Killers was an instant classic for me, with a positive example of a strong female character in Ursa, the female Viking character. That movie shows a more positive gender dynamic. She loved her father, and she loved her son, and she even adopted the other male main characters, calling them her boys. I loved her. She's not a girl boss, by the way, like some have accused her of being. She's the barbarian queen archetype, present throughout myth, literature, and history. Like Hippolyta, the Amazon queen, the pagan matriarch in Orlando Furioso, written in the Renaissance, who almost defeats Charlemagne in the story, and Queen Boudica from the Celts, and Princess Cutulun from the Mongols, not to mention Zhang Yi Sao, that Chinese pirate queen, one of the most successful pirates of all time, who only lost to the Portuguese. Women like that were rare, but they existed, and were seen as the barbarian queen by the Greeks and Romans, which later evolved into the pagan queen archetype under Christendom. I I hate cringe girl boss stuff like anyone else, but don't assume that every female warrior character is a cringe girl boss. Dan Trachtenberg did one cringe girl boss movie and one really based movie, so Predator Badlands can go in either direction. Still, I don't trust Hollywood with gender dynamics in 2025, so I hope they don't take the Predators into this Rick and Morty, Gazerp women are the intelligent ones direction. Scenario 3. Predator Space Amish. In this scenario, the Yautja Predators are a religious and ideologically driven offshoot from a typical industrialized alien civilization. The Predators we encounter are just neo-hippie space Amish that choose to live in the more simple ways of their ancient ancestors, for religious and ideological reasons, because they saw how industrial technology was not only ruining their way of life, but also genetically weakening them as a species, making them soft. So some of them form a breakaway civilization that only uses the technology they need within a ritualistic manner, making technology serve their nature instead of changing it. Maybe they're like the Eldar in Warhammer 40k, where the Space Amish faction end up rewarded by evolution because the original industrialized branch of Yautja civilization destroyed themselves in a technologically induced disaster. Maybe an AI rebellion, or a nuclear war, or a bioplague. And Darwinian evolution rewards the space Amish Yautja, who purposely limit technology according to traditions, as the only surviving faction. This scenario is interesting because it would explain the great filter aspect of the Fermi paradox that we see in the Alien vs. Predator universe, which for some reason seems quite empty of technologically advanced civilizations, at least compared to the other space operas. The great filter is the idea that civilizations tend to destroy themselves with technology that they're not wise enough to use. So the Yautja's techno-primitivism becomes the best way for them to bypass this problem and survive the Great Filter. This would explain the ritualistic reverence for the nuclear bombs that they hold in their wrists, which means the industrial faction of Yautja probably nuked themselves. This would also explain why they're obsessed with an honor-bound tradition and see human beings as inferior fools for not following their traditions and principles, seeing them as on the way to extinction. Maybe that's why they preserve some humans in cryostasis, like it was revealed in the end of the last movie, or in the book Predator Forever Midnight, where the Predators preserve entire human settlements with old 17th century technology within alien planets, maybe to save us from our self-imposed extinction so they don't lose a worthy prey for their hunts, kind of turning them into space conservationists in a way. This scenario is very interesting and also likely, since the Yautja's hunting tradition seems religious in nature. They definitely don't hunt to eat or survive. Scenario 4. Bored post-scarcity hunters. This scenario is like the last one, but slightly different. Instead of space Amish escaping a technological disaster, the Yautja achieve a post-scarcity utopia where everything is automated and they forget how to make technology on their own. Then one faction becomes super bored and develops this hunting cultural movement to gain meaning in life and destroys the softer factions. They develop a ritualistic culture because they don't know how technology actually works anymore, so they just follow the gestures and the practices that appear to work. I don't like this scenario. I think it's really lame, but it's another explanation on technology reaching a dead-end society. Scenario 5. The Animal Farm Revolution. This scenario used to be the main canon explanation in the books, like Predator Forever Midnight, that I also read in high school, before it got retconned. But this is the explanation that you'll see in most videos on Predator lore, or even in the wiki. But it's not canon. Anyway, in this scenario, they were called the Hish instead of Yautja, and the Hish are the gender-fluid hermaphroditic version of the Predators in the lore that I mentioned earlier. In this scenario, the Predators were Paleolithic hunter-gatherers in their home planet, but were colonized by technological alien visitors that took them for free-range cattle, treating them as food and beasts of burden. But over the centuries, the alien conquerors became degenerate and weak, which allowed the Hish Predators to destroy their former masters and take their technology, even enslaving some of them and keeping them around so that they are forced to make more technology, instead of the male and female Gazerp gender role division of labor hinted at in the S.D. Perry books. This again is why the Predators are so ritualistic with technology, because they don't understand how it works. Only that certain things you do makes it work. This scenario also explains why they keep losing to humans, because they're not as intelligent as us. They never truly evolved into an intelligent species, they were just given an opportunistic head start. I liked this scenario a lot as a teenager. I have more mixed feelings about it now though, because it's unoriginal. It's just the Salarian and Krogan dynamic from Mass Effect all over again. But it does speak to something fundamental about the cycle of civilizations. How harsher and more primitive nomadic societies tend to replace more technologically advanced civilizations that go soft. Like how the Mongols with bows and arrows defeated the Chinese who had gunpowder. Scenario 6. instinctive knowledge. This scenario is the most rarely talked about, but it's pretty interesting. In fact, I think it's the most interesting, and is hinted at in the first book of the Rage War trilogy, which I started reading only recently, after the last movie brought me back into the fandom and revived my passion for this franchise. But I haven't read the other 2 books in the trilogy yet, but this scenario explores the Yautja as a truly alien species. Their technology is a huge mystery since they are lone hunters with more rare social interactions between themselves and are very much driven more by instinct. They're like tigers or great white sharks, and by human standards, barely have a civilization. This book takes place in the future, so there are human scientists present who are Yautja experts, and even they have immense difficulty understanding the Yautja culture. I just assume that they stole the technology or inherited it from some other civilization that would adhere more to human standards. But when you see the Yautja point of view chapters, it's clear that they can build their own tech and are capable of innovation. The explanation for their technology seems rooted in their alien biology, which makes them capable of a different kind of technological society that humans could not replicate. For one thing, the Yautja live for 1,000 years, so that alone would give them a different relationship with knowledge and learning. We often assume advanced aliens would make modern institutions like ours in order to develop science, but what if they don't have to? What if evolving as super competent hunters in their extremely dangerous homeworld made them develop extreme intelligent brains, but with deeply ingrained predatory instincts? They can learn super fast, which makes them learn human languages really quickly. They evolved the ability to easily absorb information from their surroundings. Maybe they're even like the Protheans in Mass Effect, and they have genetic memory, which means they learn what their ancestors learned, and don't need to develop traditions of learning and education. We have to keep repeating the same knowledge over and over to babies. Therefore, they don't actually need human forms of education or university campuses where knowledge is passed down. It's naturally accumulated in their genes via each generation. Knowledge is genetically passed down along with hunting instincts. So each Yautja has millions of years of knowledge on an instinctive level, and they maybe hunt for knowledge just as much as they hunt prey, and even steal technology from other civilizations and adapt it for their own purposes. But they understand how it works. The scenario is the most intriguing one in my opinion, and it seems to make them more alien at first, but deep down it might reveal something about ourselves. We think of instinct as something only for other animals, but we humans have plenty of innate knowledge that naturally manifests itself in every culture, even the ones that never met each other. How much of what we think of as culture is actually human instinct? Sometimes we see ourselves as cavemen with nukes. Our technology may have developed, but deep down, we're still governed by the same of the so-called primitive instincts that served our ancestors way back when we had to prowl around the savannah hunting for our meals with spears. What if these are instincts we can't really get rid of? The alien versus predator universe is one defined by Darwinian evolution and fierce competition, and in this universe there's no way to transcend this fact of life. It's why the galaxy's 3 main dominant species are the xenomorphs, voracious giant bugs that just reproduce and eat everything else, the Yautja, a cosmic hunter culture, and humans, who are raging capitalists traveling from planet to planet consuming resources in the name of giant corporations. Capitalism itself is a system defined by fierce competition and a search for things to consume and transforms entire ecosystems to fit their needs, not unlike the xenomorphs and the Yautja. But when it comes to the idea of the caveman with nuclear weapons, it reminds us that civilizational progress isn't replacing the past, but building upon it. When we progress, we don't replace the old with the new, we actually just build upon the old into new and greater heights. We still seek resources to attract females and engage in territorial disputes with other tribes of humans. We just do this in an industrialized environment. And the different periods in our history constantly add new traditions and institutions. Our republic system developed in ancient Roman times. Our universities are actually medieval institutions still operating on feudal logic. The word tenure, used in academia today, was a feudal concept involving land ownership. But as we build upon the older foundations and ascend to the stars, we can't forget where we come from, which is what makes the idea of a Paleolithic hunter in space so fascinating. I'd like to thank our patrons for their support, and thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.